nationalism? What is that to you?
Yeah. So I think there's lots of different ways you could describe it. The way I define it is a little broader. I say Christian nationalism is the worship of power, whether it's social power, economic power, political power, in the name of Christ. And I think it's relevant to describe it this way because it's something we've struggled with within the Christian church from the very beginning. So the first followers of Jesus didn't even call themselves Christians. They called themselves the Way because their crucified teacher had taught them a different way of being human, a different way of relating to other people, of understanding your relationship to neighbor and to God. And this transformed them. They became these peculiar people, is how the Bible describes it, because they didn't participate in the economy, the military, the culture. They were persecuted because they turned the world upside down. Again, that's how it's described in Acts. But 300 years after that, after the Roman Empire crucified Jesus, Emperor Constantine made Christianity the official religion of that very same empire, the same empire that crucified Jesus. So this is 300 years later, and now Christianity is the official sponsor of the empire, of Western civilization.
Do you think Constantine was a Christian, like legitimately, or do you think that he was using it?
It's always hard to tell with politicians, and I say this as a politician myself.
When was Constantine baptized?
Well, he was baptized, I don't know the year, but he was baptized after he had this vision before a decisive battle, when he saw the cross and decided that his soldiers would put the cross as part of their emblem, and then they won that battle, right? Which, who knows if it was because of his vision or not. But it started a trend which we've struggled with for literally, more than 1,500 years of powerful people, emperors, billionaires, dictators, megachurch pastors, using religion to protect their own wealth and power.
Yeah.
And to me, Christian nationalism is just the latest iteration of that, whether it's the Ten Commandments bill, whether it's the bill, I don't know if you read about this, a bill that we passed that allows schools to replace school counselors with untrained, unsupervised religious chaplains. Sometimes people who go online and become a chaplain within 5 minutes. That to me, again, is an example of Christian nationalism. It's using the state, it's using political power to elevate one religious tradition over all the others. It's using governmental power to dominate our neighbors instead of loving them as ourselves, which is exactly what we're called to do as Christians. And then, of course, most recently we saw this bill that defunded public schools here in Texas to subsidize private Christian schools. And to me, again, that is a bill that's right in the middle of this Christian nationalist movement to erode the separation of church and state and force a certain interpretation of Christianity on everybody against their wills.
Yeah, there's this narrative that this is a Christian nation. This is
Sure.
It was founded as a Christian nation, and I think they call upon that.
Yeah.
When they're making these decisions and talking about it in this very particular way.
Yeah, and I think no one would disagree that Christianity was influential in the founding of this country, and is still influential. I mean, it's suffused throughout our culture, our politics. It is a central part of who we are as a nation. But I think it's really important to clarify that we were not founded as a Christian nation. We were founded as a nation where you are free to be a Christian or a Jew or a Muslim or a Sikh or a Buddhist or an atheist. I mean, that's the promise of America, is that we are this multicultural melting pot where no one is told how to pray and no religion is elevated over the others.
It's also important to point out that it wasn't in the Pledge of Allegiance until communism was an issue in this country.
Yeah, and to be fair, the Declaration of Independence does mention a creator, and now it doesn't necessarily mention the Christian God, but it does mention a creator. I think probably in a deliberate attempt to be less sectarian and more open. I mean, a lot of our founders, if we're being honest, some of them weren't religious at all, Thomas Paine, and then a lot of them weren't really what we would consider Christians today. A lot of them were deists, where they saw God as this impersonal clockmaker who created the universe and stepped away.
Clockmaker.
And I'm not.
That's an interesting way of describing it.
Well, and I'm not casting aspersion that. Yeah.
Where did you come up with that?
I think this is how deists would describe it, because
They would
the universe
describe it as a clockmaker? Really?
Yeah, that the universe is, and it's because they were Enlightenment thinkers, so they were enthralled by physics and the natural scientists, and they saw that the universe fit together in this perfect way, almost like a clock or a watch, and so they assumed that God was this watchmaker, this clockmaker, and then kind of stepped away from God's creation. Mm-hmm. That is a very different view. It's not an invalid view. I don't mean to cast aspersions on that view, but it's very different than a lot of Christians today who have a personal relationship with God and feel God's intervention in our lives and in our world. And so those are very different kinds of religious. And so for Christian nationalists today to say, that our founders were these evangelical Protestant Christians is just not quite historically accurate. These were Enlightenment thinkers. They had their own suspicions of religion. I mean, Thomas Jefferson created his own Bible where he took out all the miracles.
Really?
Yeah.
He also owned slaves.
Well, yeah. I mean, and then all these guys had...
Pretty anti-Christian.
I would say so. But again, Christianity was used to justify slavery. It was also used by abolitionists to tear it down, right? Christianity was used by Bull Connor and white officials in the South to maintain Jim Crow. And it was also used by Dr. King and the Civil Rights Movement to tear down that system. Yeah. So, faith, it's really in the hands of the user. It can be used to do a lot of damage to people, but it can also be used to move us toward a more just and loving world.
That's where it gets weird, right? It's like we need someone who interprets faith in a way that is beneficial for all and not personally beneficial or beneficial to their ideology or the narrative that they're trying to push, right?
Well, and I honestly think, if I'm being my most hopeful self, that Gen Z and millennials, young people are going to be the ones to lead us out of this. Because
why?
Because
of TikTok?
No, because of the TikTok.
Because they're addicted to video games?
Because
what is it?
Because there is power in disillusionment.
Okay.
Because that's fertile ground. So let me back up. So in my faith tradition, Jesus is not just a great teacher. Jesus is the embodiment of the pattern of the universe. Right, this is trippy stuff.
I like trippy stuff.
Yeah. He, in his person, his life, his death, his teachings, that we somehow learn something about God, this ultimate reality. And Jesus' life, again, in our tradition, the milestones are Incarnation, that's Christmas, right, when God takes human form. Incarnation, by the way, is not just limited to Jesus, it's everybody, right? Everybody bears the image of the sacred, right? Joe Rogan does, James Talarico does, every listener to this podcast bears the image of the sacred, made in the image of God. A radical view, right? Mm-hmm. So that's Incarnation. The second is Crucifixion, right? That's Good Friday, where Jesus, because he confronts the powerful, is executed on a cross, a humiliating death along with other criminals. And then the last step is resurrection. That something new and beautiful rises from those ashes. So those three things, Incarnation, Crucifixion, resurrection, that's the pattern of the universe. Again, just take religion out of it for a second. Let's just think like a physicist or a biologist. Creation, destruction, recreation. I mean, that is the story of the physical universe. It's the story of our lives, right? That we are all headed toward a brick wall at the end of this, right? There is birth, death, rebirth. Hindus would say reincarnation, right? This pattern of reality is something that's recognized across traditions. I say all this in response to your question because all of us in our faith start off with order, disorder, and then reorder if we get to that last step. All of us kind of inherited a faith from our parents. It was usually pretty stable. We didn't ask any questions. And it was comforting, right? You were childish in the best sense of that word, innocent. You grow up, you have experiences, you meet new people, you're exposed to new ideas. Suddenly you start to question all those things that you were taught. And now you have disorder, disillusionment, right? That maybe what I was told wasn't real. And maybe this isn't right. Maybe I've got to question everything. And that's healthy and essential. You need that crucifixion to break apart what was there before. That third step of resurrection, reincarnation, rebirth, reorder, however you want to describe it, to me, it feels like that's what we're on the precipice of. And it does feel like young people in particular are the ones that are asking these questions, because young people have always, on every major issue, have usually been the ones who have been able to kind of think outside the box and see things anew. But it does feel like they are waking up to how broken organized religion is. And they are starting to yearn for something bigger and something better and something that's more true and more honest. I hear from people all day long, yes, on TikTok, but also in real life, where they're just like, I want a relationship with God, and I'm just not sure how to find that. I mean, I think that's, maybe it was the pandemic, but there is something brewing out there where people, they're hungry for something bigger and deeper. So again, that's me on my hopeful days. I've also had my days where I'm more cynical, but...
What happens on your cynical days?
So I'm in my fourth term in the Texas House. And they're 2-year terms, so that's 8 years. In my second term, I kind of had a crisis of confidence, I guess. It was a brutal session. It was a lot of really vicious fights on the House floor, a lot of really terrible bills. The abortion ban, which we just talked about, was passed in my second term. And I just kind of, I honestly lost faith in the impact I was making, and maybe even in democracy as a whole, whether this thing was even going to work, this idea that we were all going to try to solve our conflicts nonviolently and peacefully through a political process. I don't know, all of that kind of, I started to doubt in a profound way the work I was doing. And throughout my life, whenever I've felt that doubt, I've always fallen back on faith. Faith is the thing that is kind of the foundation for me. And so in that second term, I had thought about quitting altogether. I thought about resigning my seat and just going off to do other things that maybe would be more fruitful. But through a lot of praying and a lot of soul searching and a lot of meditation, I made a slightly different choice, which was to go to seminary and go back to school and go through the process of becoming a minister. My granddad was a Baptist minister in South Texas, and so it was a part of my upbringing. And I had really not thought about doing it myself, but I think I had just loving thy neighbor is really hard sometimes. And the work I do in the legislature is my attempt to love my neighbor through the bills I pass, through the work that I do on prescription drugs, on childcare, on public schools, on justice reform. But I was losing.
She just fought Paige. Is it Ostrovich?
Rachel Ostovich.
Ostrovich,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
Did you already say her? Sorry.
No, I didn't say her.
I'm just trying to...
So they're doing a smart thing where they're getting popular fighters or who are, known for UFC fights mostly, and then just introducing the bare knuckle world to them.
Yeah.
And I know it's growing, right? I mean, it's people are paying attention now. They're watching a lot of fights.
Yeah, I know Forbes just did a write-up saying it's the fastest growing combat sport in the world right now, and
Well, I always thought that it was weird that you could elbow somebody in the face, you could head kick somebody with a bare shin, you can knee them in the nose with no pads, but your hands are covered with a pad. I was like, but I used to say why don't we just go bare knuckle? Because first of all, it'll make grappling more realistic, like submissions. You could sink in chokes and stuff much
100%.
easier. But then I saw Chris Lieben versus who was it? Dakota. What's his name? Anyway, Chris Lieben's face got destroyed.
Yeah,
It was crazy, the cuts. And I was like, oh, maybe bare knuckle's pretty fucked.
It is, and I think that's you know, you're going to have a lot of blood, which probably makes it pretty entertaining for a lot of people. But yeah, cuts are definitely going to be there. I mean, like you said, elbows though in the UFC, like you throw up against
Just
the
get
cage, and
slashed
elbow
up.
somebody, or even off their back, and you're on top dropping elbows. I mean, those cut probably more than knuckles, I would imagine. But I think you get hit a lot more with punches than you do with elbows in a fight, and that's probably where more cuts would come in. But
how many of these things are you gonna have?
Man, so here's the situation. I'm still under UFC contract.
Really?
I still have fights on my UFC contract. So, you know, there still is a possibility that I come back and maybe I want to do 1 or 2 more UFC fights after this. We'll see. I'm going to get in there. And
Is the UFC giving you a green light to do this? Is that how it works?
Uh-huh.
Interesting.
And so, which is super cool to UFC. I mean, they basically could have just said, fuck you, you're not competing anymore.
Well, they kind of said fuck you to George St. Pierre when he wanted to fight Oscar De La Hoya.
Well, that's because it's Oscar.
I know, but come on, man. That's a great payday for George.
I know. And in fact, some of that stuff was in the works for me. Like my name was thrown in there with Oscar.
Really?
Yeah. Which would have been freaking cool just to say you get in there and box a guy like Oscar. But yeah, they wanted nothing to do with any of that stuff. So, you know,
yeah,
for
the
them
UFC
to let me
and
go,
Oscar do not get. It's Dana and Oscar do not get along.
Yeah.
What is the source of that? Do you know?
I don't know, but I always see them talking shit to each other. It's
so dumb.
Yeah. But
so dumb.
yeah.
Like, you know, why?
Yeah.
What's happening?
I don't know. But luckily, the payday I was talking about getting with them is what I'm getting in bare knuckle now. And, you know, obviously it would have been cooler to say that I'm boxing Oscar De La Hoya, but
Now I remember why. Oscar De La Hoya had that MMA organization for a short period of time where he had Tito fight Chuck. Remember that?
Yep.
And he was talking all kinds of shit about the UFC and talking all kinds of shit about fighter pay. And then he's one and done and the organization falls.
Yeah. Understandable.
That's why.
But
they always do that, though. They always come for the UFC. When you're the UFC, it's like...
That's got to be pretty cool for the UFC. Everyone's always trying to be the UFC or trying to create these MMA organizations that are trying to be on the level of the UFC. Nobody's ever going to do that, you know?
Yeah.
And I mean, I get... If somebody was talking shit to me, I would be like, fuck you too. Like if I was in Dana's position, you know? But none of these guys are ever going to touch the UFC.
Well, the only one that's close is Bellator.
Yeah.
Bellator has some real legit talent right now. Nemkov, AJ McKee.
Yeah.
He's a bad motherfucker, dude. The way he took out Pitbull in that last fight, dude, that guy is legit. Legit. 18-0, undefeated, world champion. You know, I mean, come on, man.
Yeah.
Douglas Lima, world class. Michael Venom Page. They got legit talent over there. You know, they really do. Gerard Mousasi.
Yeah. No, I agree. And